We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Barbara Udit. I'm the president of the Gulf Breeze Area Historical Society. And I'm going to go ahead and open us with prayer, if you'll bow with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we just praise you for this beautiful day. Just a beautiful, beautiful day here on the Gulf Coast. We thank you for the freedom that we have to meet here tonight, to share information, to just to thank you for all the blessings in our life. I thank you for every person that's here tonight, and I thank you for the ones that aren't here. Bless us and protect us and keep us in your loving care. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, and I'm going to ask Casimer, our guest, to lead us in the, if you'll rise, for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And then I'm going to ask Jim to come up and introduce Casimer.
Okay.
Jim Cox, our Vice President.
I prefer the term president of vice. I'm delighted to have Naval Live Oaks here. Okay, Casimer Rosiecki, okay, has been with the Park Service now for 12 years, and,
Yeah.
and
oh.
6 years with
Number two.
6 years with the Gulf Islands Shore. Okay, my wife Lila and I hike there all the time, probably once a week. We're hiking slow walls trails there, and a variety of topography and foliage and everything else you see there. But Naval Live Oaks is always fascinating because we're so proud of our 60 years history as a city of Gulf Breeze. Well, they've got over 200 years of history. Okay, and it enables you to imagine how this whole area was a long time ago. Okay, and so I'd like to introduce you. I'm really looking forward to hearing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. On behalf of the National Park Service, thank you so much for inviting me to speak before you. Again, my name is Casimer Rosiecki. I'm a park ranger with the National Park Service, but I'm stationed here at Gulf Islands National Seashore. I was a little taken aback when Jim said I've been with the Park Service for 12 years. I usually just say since 2010, and it just kind of weighs on me more differently when I hear 12 years. But time has gone by. It's been a privilege of mine and really a dream come true to get to be a park ranger. So I've been with the Park Service since 2010. I started kind of on a whim applying to an internship at a national park called Harpers Ferry National Historical Park. I was attending college, wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with my life, getting pretty close to graduation. Parents were starting to ask, hey, what are you going to do next? I hadn't quite figured it out yet, but I ran into a park ranger who made me aware of internships at his park, Harpers Ferry. So I applied, I was offered a position, and I spent the summer living and working in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. I got to volunteer in a role very similar to that of a park ranger. I was working beside people wearing the uniform that I get to wear today. It took me at most 1 week to really see and figure myself out, figure what I wanted to do with the rest of my life professionally. From that first week at Harpers Ferry, I knew I wanted to pursue a career with the National Park Service. But before that could happen, I had to go back to school, graduate, and then after graduating, I went back to Harpers Ferry, did another internship, learning a little bit more about the types of other positions rangers fulfill. And then from this, let's see, that would have been the winter of 2011. In the summer of 2011, I went to Gettysburg National Military Park and spent a summer there working as an intern, but leading programs in the National Cemetery and other areas out on the battlefield. I went back to Gettysburg in the summer of 2012. But that year was really exciting for me because I got to return in the green and gray. I was able to work there as a seasonal park ranger, doing more programs for visitors out on the battlefield. And I've continued to work at Gettysburg seasonally from the summer of 2012 all the way through the spring of 2015. If you are keyed in on history, U.S. history in particular, you might be aware then that 2013 marked the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. So I got to work there during the big sesquicentennial, which was quite an experience on many levels. But one can only do, well for me, I could only do seasonal work for so long. While I was working seasonally, I was also trying to find a year-round permanent position with the National Park Service. That was the goal, that was the dream. And that dream was fulfilled in the spring of 2015 when I said farewell to Gettysburg and moved on up to Boston and worked at Boston National Historical Park. Boston National Historical Park is made up of a few different sites along what's called the Freedom Trail. It guides visitors to the city from the Revolution to the Revolutionary War battles, to include Bunker Hill, and on over to the Charlestown Navy Yard, where a certain ship called the USS Constitution resides. USS Constitution might get mentioned here in this program once or twice. And then said farewell to Boston in 2016. In October of 2016, I left, traveled south, and came here to Gulf Islands. I came here initially at a position called Park Guide. That's what I did for a few years, still leading programs, wearing the same uniform. But then I stuck around too long, and they decided to promote me. So now I get to continue developing programs, leading programs, and supervising interns and seasonals. So I get to develop those individuals who come in and fill roles that I once got to fill. So history has largely been my focus with the National Park Service, and that's largely been my focus here at Gulf Islands National Seashore. Anybody here been to Gulf Islands National Seashore? Yeah, okay. Out at Fort Pickens, I often ask visitors, who here has been to Fort Pickens before? And I'll see hands go up, and then I'll ask, all right, who's been to Gulf Islands National Seashore before? And on occasion, we don't get any hands, even those hands to Fort Pickens. Sometimes they don't go up. But if you've been to Fort Pickens, if you've been to the Naval Live Oaks area, if you've been to Johnson Beach or Rosamond Johnson Beach over on Perdido Key, you have been to Gulf Islands National Seashore. I'm going to advance one slide and quickly reintroduce you to the seashore. So as of December, this past December, there are now 424 National Park units within the National Park System, administered by the National Park Service, the organization. Of those 424 national parks, only 10 are called National Seashores. National seashores, along with national lake shores, were established in the post-World War II years. So in the 1960s and the 1970s, that's when you saw national seashores pop up along the Atlantic coast, the Gulf Coast, and the Pacific. And then up on the Great Lakes, you also saw the rise of some national lake shores. Today, since 1971, which is when Gulf Islands was established, since that time, Gulf Islands represents the largest national seashore. Annually, we get somewhere around 5 million visitors. The past few years, Gulf Islands has ranked among the most visited national parks in the nation. So I said national parks, so that includes places like Great Smoky Mountains, which usually takes the #1 spot. But that also includes iconic parks like Great Smoky Mountains, Yellowstone, Grand Canyon. We rank up there with visitors. The National Seashore spans about 160 miles. So from an area that we call Okaloosa area near Fort Walton Beach and Destin, as the crow flies to Cat Island near New Orleans. That is going to represent how wide Gulf Islands ranges along the northern Gulf Coast. The congressionally authorized acreage totals over 139,000 acres. The surprising thing about that number is that 82% of that number is marine habitat. Gulf Islands is very much a water park. Our boundaries extend out into the Gulf of Mexico. They extend into Pensacola Bay. They extend into Santa Rosa Sound. And in our Mississippi district, they extend into Mississippi Sound. Also want to remind you too that Gulf Islands is one park, but we're located in 2 states. So we have the Florida district here, and then over in Mississippi we have the Mississippi district anchored in Ocean Springs, but largely made up of a series of barrier islands that range anywhere from 9 to 13 miles off of the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Because I'm the history person, I'm going to highlight some of those things here. Gulf Islands has one of the finest collections of seacoast defenses in the nation. We have one 18th century fort, that's the Spanish water battery, the Bateria de San Antonio, located at our Fort Barrancas area aboard the Naval Air Station. We have 4 19th century forts. Those include Fort Pickens, Fort Barrancas, Advanced Redoubt, all here in the Florida district, and then over in the Mississippi district, we have Fort Massachusetts out on Ship Island. And then there are some 15 late 1800s and early 1900s coastal batteries. Those are concrete structures that mounted different types of steel rifled cannon that date from the Spanish-American War through World War II. And then over the past couple of years, and I wanted to make a mention of this because I'll allude to it later on in the program, but the past few years, I have spent a large amount of time researching Underground Railroad stories here in the Pensacola area. The research that I was able to do, along with the research done by some of my former interns, we were able to create these research papers, these applications, where we had verifiable evidence of enslaved individuals, or people that we today call freedom seekers, making their way to places like Fort Pickens or Fort Barrancas, or trying to hide aboard merchant ships in Pensacola, hoping that those merchant ships would take them to destinations up north where slavery was illegal. So with those research applications, we were able to work with a program overseen by the National Park Service called the National Underground Railroad Network of Freedom Program. That program works with public sites and privately owned sites to elevate Underground Railroad stories, the history of the Underground Railroad. And working with them, we were able to get a total of 6 federal designations to places within Gulf Islands that are verifiably underground, have verifiable connections to the Underground Railroad. That also represents the single most Underground Railroad designations of any national park that exists today.
Do you have a program at the Fort Pickens about the Underground Railroad?
Yeah, in fact I did one today. Since mid-January, we've been doing a program called Freedom's Fortress. It's a 20-minute stationary talk, and we talk about the relationship really that Fort Pickens had with the Underground Railroad, but also President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. 2023 marks the 160th anniversary of the proclamation, so we've been doing a short talk to weave those 3 subjects together. So it's a new program, and one that we're going to continue to do the rest of this month and into March as well, and one that I hope to offer into the summer and year-round. I want it to become one of our mainstays so that we can elevate that story. So needless to say, Gulf Islands is quite a place. And for our visual learners, here we have a map, I'll leave it up here just briefly, showing how far Gulf Islands ranges from the Okaloosa area near Fort Walton Beach all the way to Cat Island, parts of Cat Island being a part of the national park. And then our boundaries extend, for instance, at Naval Live Oaks out into Santa Rosa Sound and a little bit into Pensacola Bay.
And what is that called at Fort Walton Beach?
Okaloosa area.
It doesn't have like a name.
maybe you guys can educate me on this. That's the name of our area. It's called Okaloosa area. It's about 25 acres. It's on Choctawhatchee Bay, Santa Rosa Sound, so the northern side of the island. But the beach community there on the island is called Okaloosa Island.
Okay,
I've never quite understood why, because it's on Santa Rosa Island. I just need to learn why that might be. But yeah, we call that the Okaloosa area. It's largely used for recreational purposes. And then here's a more detailed view of the Florida district. So again, Okaloosa area near Fort Walton Beach. Between Navarre Beach and Pensacola Beach, we have the Santa Rosa area with Opal Beach. And then occupying some 9,000 acres on the west end of the island is Fort Pickens area. On Perdido Key, we have the Perdido Key and Rosamond Johnson Beach. And then on Naval Air Station, Pensacola, is the Fort Barrancas area with Advanced Redoubt, Fort Barrancas itself, and the Spanish Water Battery. But I left one off. Which one did I forget? Gulf Breeze. Yeah, Naval Live Oaks area, about 1,300 acres. So, we're going to be talking a little bit more specifically about the Deer Point Naval Live Oak Plantation. But I want to quickly ask you guys a question. When you think of anything, when you think of our nation's symbols, things that represent the United States of America, what immediately jumps to mind for you?
Eagle.
The eagle? What kind of eagle?
The bald
The
eagle.
bald eagle. Yeah, that's a good symbol of the United States. What else? It's a good symbol of our nation. Anything else? Any people, places? Anything that, when you think of the United States, you think, hey, that's our nation.
George Washington, the currency president.
Abraham Lincoln, yeah.
Penny.
The what?
The penny.
The penny.
When it was really
Of
called
course. Yeah.
The what?
penny, the copper penny.
Yeah. Well, one thing that maybe we should also consider adopt is the live oak tree. In fact, the oak is the nation's national tree.
I have built boats.
Yeah, and there's many different species of oak. We're going to talk about one in particular, and that is the live oak. The live oak is a gorgeous tree. It's quite the emblem of the Old South. I know growing up as a little boy, I grew up watching old Turner Classic movies with Mom. One of them happened to be Gone with the Wind. And there's that one iconic image of Scarlett with her, I think her father overlooking the plantation, and over reaching over them, are the sprawling limbs of a live oak tree. So I think a lot of people today, because of popular culture like those movies, like Gone with the Wind, when they think of the antebellum South, the Old South, the American South, one of the images that might come to mind would be the live oak tree. The live oak tree is a nearly evergreen tree. It produces leaves almost year-round, hence the name. What's that?
Oh, yeah.
Hence, yeah, raking a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They're very distinctive. They have massive limbs that come down generally off of one trunk, sweep towards the ground, and then back up. They can grow to cover an area about 150 feet wide. They can occupy a space that might take up close to about half a football field.
Wow.
It's quite a bit of room. And they can grow up to heights of about 50 feet. They do play a critical role in the ecosystem. They produce a lot of acorns. Those acorns are used by different forms of wildlife, from birds to white-tailed deer to black bear.
Squirrels.
And squirrels, yeah. Even Native Americans relied on the live oak acorn, using it, processing it down to form something kind of similar to an olive oil. So for thousands of years, people have relied on the live oak tree. Animals have relied on the live oak tree for shelter, for food, and even today, I think the live oak tree, I think maybe for those of us who live on the Gulf Coast, we would all agree that it still continues to play a surprising role in our communities. When the Deer Point Naval Live Oak Plantation was established in 1828, it would be established to provide for the common defense of the United States. And here we are still today, and the live oak tree is still, in a sense, defending our shorelines.
Yeah.
So the Deer Point Naval Live Oak Plantation was established in 1828. It was set aside largely for the Naval Department. The Navy wanting to reserve public lands that had yellow pine, red cedar, and live oak trees for processing to build a naval fleet, U.S. warships. And so when Florida became a U.S. territory in 1821, the federal government moved pretty quickly to start to develop Pensacola Bay. So Florida became a U.S. territory in 1821, and later that year, or early 1822, Army and Navy officers began studying the coastline, and the Army and Navy quickly fell in love with Pensacola Bay, largely because of the naturally deep harbor. A naturally deep harbor for the Navy would provide ease of access for different sized ships to come to and from the Gulf of Mexico. But in order to protect that harbor and to protect a naval yard, a complex, an industrial complex essentially, for constructing new warships, for repairing ships or modifying ships, Pensacola Navy Yard was established in 1825. And it would be the only federal Navy yard constructed and maintained on the Gulf Coast. So in order to protect the harbor and the Navy Yard, the Corps of Engineers came in and they envisioned a network or a system of masonry forts to protect that, the harbor and the Navy Yard itself. And that's how we would get Fort Pickens, Fort McRae, which no longer exists, but once stood on the eastern end of Perdido Key. That's how we also got Fort Barrancas and Advanced Redoubt. All of that was, over the course of a few decades, would come to represent a sprawling, a massive Army-Navy complex. But a component of that complex that's often overlooked is the Deer Point Naval Live Oak Plantation. Some 1,600 arpents, the equivalent of about 1,300 acres, was set aside for the purpose to conserve and cultivate, that's the key word, cultivate the live oak tree. So there were already efforts to reserve public lands to set aside timber for future use, but there was only ever one farm established to cultivate live oak trees, and the one and only was the Deer Point Naval Live Oak Plantation. It remained in existence essentially until 1861. What happened in 1861? The Civil War. But also the advent of new technologies, principally the steam-powered steel-hulled warship. So you have the Deer Point Naval Live Oak Plantation, established in 1828, would continue in service for about, well, a few decades through 1861. But also going on at that time with the development of the Navy Yard, the building of the forts, and the establishment of the Deer Point Naval Live Oak Plantation, you also have something called, today we call it the first American road in Florida. Anybody familiar with that?
98, isn't it?
98?
Highway 98?
U.S. Highway 98 would replace the Pensacola St. Augustine Road. So again, this is 1824. The Florida Territory had just been admitted into the Union a few years earlier. And very quickly, Floridians and those migrating here from other southern states like South Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia, they're wanting to build infrastructure. With more reliable infrastructure, you can move more easily commodities. You can build a stronger economy. You can move information more. You can move people more. So that's when the first American road to Florida would be developed. In the Naval Live Oaks area of the national park, we call that the Jackson Trail. Only about 2.5 miles of that trail exists today from the western boundary to the eastern boundary. It's just north of US 98. But that Jackson Trail represents a part of that first American road in Florida. Today, the first American road in Florida is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Here, the Pensacola branch of the road was begun at Deer Point. U.S. soldiers from the 4th Infantry were used to start blazing that path, surveying the site for the road, clearing vegetation, and then installing that road. Meanwhile, near the Apalachicola River, a wealthy enslaver forced enslaved individuals to start constructing that span to eventually unite. In time, some 400 miles of that road would be constructed and in time maintained. And that road would be useful here in the Deer Point Naval Live Oak Plantation. So what exactly were policymakers, officers of the Army and the Navy, what were they thinking? Well, they were thinking about the future of the nation. The idea of setting aside public lands to conserve timber like the red cedar, the yellow pine, and the live oak, that policy was sort of used and supported from about 1794 through about 1860. Those stands of trees in places like the Naval Live Oak reservations on Pensacola Bay, but also that Naval Live Oak plantation, they could be used to produce more quickly larger and healthier live oak trees to be used in the construction of ships like the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides. Here we see Old Ironsides during the War of 1812 engaged in a fight against the HMS Guerriere. It's in this fight that Old Ironsides would earn its nickname. To construct a frigate similar to that of the USS Constitution, that would require some 460 live oak trees. Different parts of those trees used to build different parts of the hull. But a ship like the Constitution would be made up of white oak, live oak, yellow pine, and red cedar. The U.S. Navy would come to see the live oak as more dense, more resistant to salt water in the marine environment, and generally far superior to the British oak. So that's why these live oak plantations and reservations are going to be set aside to ensure that U.S. warships can be produced into the future to protect American democracy and American merchants. A lot of credit for the establishment of the live oak plantation and the reservation program falls on a few different people, one of which was President John Quincy Adams. He was president from 1825 through 1829. He loved experimenting with cultivating different plants, including the live oak tree. In fact, he would be in communication on a few occasions with the individual assigned to superintend, oversee the live oak plantation here on the Gulf Breeze Peninsula. So just imagine a president of the United States at what we today call the White House, experimenting out back, cultivating different plants and playing around the garden. That's kind of what John Quincy Adams was doing. President Andrew Jackson would become president after John Quincy Adams. And in the presidential campaign for control of the White House between Adams and Jackson, that campaign was pretty heated, pretty vitriolic between the two contending for control of the White House. When Jackson claimed victory, he naturally was suspicious of the Adams administration, believing that it was in many ways corrupt. And so Jackson, by nature, was suspicious of the idea of establishing a live oak plantation here at Deer Point. And so the history of the live oak plantation here got off to kind of a bit of a rocky start because of national politics around individuals like Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. But the program itself would continue under the Jackson administration. President James Monroe first appointed Samuel Southard of New Jersey to serve as Secretary of State. When John Quincy Adams entered the White House, he would retain Southard in that position. And Southard would play a pretty prominent role in expanding the U.S. Navy to include implementing a more wide-ranging reservation program, establishing naval hospitals, increasing the personnel in the Navy from officers to midshipmen, to expanding the number of ships, and of course, setting up the live oak plantation to cultivate live oak trees. He would help work with Adams and Henry Marie Brackenridge. Brackenridge was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was a writer, a diplomat. He was a judge, a politician, and he would come to know Andrew Jackson, Jackson having used Brackenridge as a secretary during Jackson's time here in Pensacola in the late 18 teens and around 1820. Brackenridge would be appointed the superintendent of the live oak plantation and worked there from about 1828 until about 1831-32 when he left Pensacola to return to Pennsylvania. Brackenridge's interest and fascination with cultivating plants either equaled that of John Quincy Adams, or maybe even exceeded. He is going to have, Brackenridge that is going to have an overseer, Samuel Davis, who employed and forced to labor on that plantation anywhere from 10 to 20 enslaved individuals at any given time. So it's one of the ironies wrapped up in the entire program itself. The live oak trees here at a place like Gulf Breeze were set aside to be harvested and used to produce warships to protect American ideals, one of which being that all people are born free and equal. Yet the live oak trees that would potentially be used to build those warships to defend those ideals were maintained by the hands of enslaved individuals. And it's possible, too, that Henry Brackenridge himself was an enslaver. Brackenridge set up the plantation headquarters in his residence, which once located sat over Santa Rosa Sound. So that would be today on the south side of US 98, very near the western boundary of the Naval Live Oaks area. His residence covered an area of about 23 acres. It included a large main house, along with outdoor gardens and outdoor buildings. So here you have the Sound and then the mainland, the live oak plantation, along with the plantation headquarters. The work would have been grueling. Anybody here ever walked through any of the trails of Naval Live Oaks during the summer months? Is it comfortable? Yeah?
No. Stickers.
Lots of shade,
sand.
yeah. But you're not having to labor, right? Cut down, saw, fell trees, especially trees like the live oak, which can dull a saw pretty quickly. You're not having to work long, extensive hours being forced to fell those trees and transport them to locations where they can be sent over to a place like the Pensacola Navy Yard. It would have been grueling work, not easy, and of course you wouldn't be compensated as human property. But the enslaved laborers and the overseer, they would create these paths, what they called avenues, to blaze these openings through the plantation, believing that if they could encourage the movement, the flow of air, and maintain the ground brush and keep it cleared and away from the trunks, the root systems of those live oak trees, that could lead to more healthy, more quickly produced mature live oak trees for use by the Navy. So I mentioned earlier some of the work that I've done in relation to the Underground Railroad, and there is this little piece of evidence to suggest that the net of the Underground Railroad would stretch across this peninsula. This is here a advertisement in the Pensacola Gazette that appeared on July 7, 1829, of a enslaved man by the name of Hector, about 55 years of age, stood about 6 feet tall. The enslavers had reported that Hector landed and left his raft at Deer Point and then disappeared. As far as the National Park Service goes, that would qualify Deer Point for inclusion in the Network to Freedom program. There's evidence here, though, to suggest that, of course, this individual sought freedom by coming to this peninsula and maybe using the Florida Road, the Jackson Trail, using the reservation or the plantation to gain their freedom. What came of Hector, we'll probably never know, but it's evidence like this. This shows us what the Underground Railroad for some individuals would have looked like. So I mentioned earlier that the reservation program and the live oak plantation would largely come to an end. Well, for the live oak plantation, its use would come to an end about 1861 with the start of the Civil War. It's in the 1890s that the Department of the Navy, I believe, looked to transfer some of that land back to the state of Florida. But some of the live oak trees from the Pensacola area, possibly from the live oak plantation, would see use again in the 20th century. Here we see a photograph taken near a Commodore's Pond on the Naval Air Station Pensacola in the 1930s. There had been rumors and reports of live oak trees that had been felled, and in order to preserve them for many, many years to come, they were placed in freshwater ponds. And in order to restore the USS Constitution, the Navy came here to the Naval Air Station and found those live oak timbers, pulled them up, and would send them in to be used to restore the USS Constitution Old Ironsides. More timber, live oak timber, was found at the Naval Air Station again in the 1960s. And it too has been earmarked for future restoration of our nation's ship of state, I think is what it's considered today. So the legacy of the live oak continues to survive here in surprising ways. But again, the history that's woven into that nature preserve is multi-layered. It is a paradise for people who want to immerse themselves in a maritime forest here on the Gulf Coast. It is a part of our nation's military legacy, a living legacy at that. But it's also a place where you can explore thousands of years of human activity here along the northern Gulf Coast. So I appreciate you giving me some of the time today, the floor, to share a little bit about the Naval Live Oaks with you. Any questions about anything I shared or anything else about the park?
Was that Deer Point, plantation where our Deer Point is now? Is that the same place?
So, no.
Just the same
Maps from the 1800s kind of contradict and conflict with one another. So at the time, so today we're on what is generally called the Gulf Breeze Peninsula. It seems that in the early to mid 19th century, the more common name was the Santa Rosa Peninsula. Maps typically show, though, Deer Point to be the southwestern point of this peninsula, whereas either Town Point or Fair Point would be the northwestern tip of the peninsula. So for that runaway advertisement related to like Hector, it said that he left his raft at Deer Point. That's probably talking about that specific location, and then he likely made his way eastward through the reserve and then eventually the plantation. There's just the common references to Deer Point. I'm not really sure why that captured the attention of politicians, lawmakers, and officers in the Army and the Navy, but that's what they sort of focused on.
Well, regardless of the name,
Yeah.
where was it?
The Deer Point plantation?
Yes, the trees.
Yeah.
The actual plantation.
So largely where the Naval Live Oaks area exists today. I have not seen any evidence to suggest that the boundaries are all that different. Let me go back to that earlier map.
It has nothing to do with the Deer Point area that we call
Oh, that's
Deer
not going to be a
Point.
good map. There's, over here, I brought some park brochures. In there, you'll find a detailed map of the Pensacola Bay area. And that'll show you the naval, what we today call the Naval Live Oaks area. It's this political nature surrounded by development on either side. And that is where the Live Oak plantation, the Deer Point plantation is located.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea over all the years how many trees or how many tons of lumber were harvested here?
From the plantation and the reservations? No, I don't know. No.
That'd be an awesome number.
Potentially. So the live oak trees range from southeastern Virginia all the way to South Texas and into Mexico. Some of the earliest, our nation's earliest ships, like the Constitution, they were made up largely of live oak harvested from Georgia.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I don't know that the U.S. Navy, I don't know if the ships ever totaled more than maybe 60 vessels at the height. And so I don't know if there was ever this wide felling of trees and processing of them for building ships. And the Pensacola Navy Yard only ever launched 2 ships. One of them in 1857 or 58, and the other one prior to 1860. The USS Seminole and the USS Pensacola were launched here, and that was it. And then the Navy Yard would close around 1911 and reopen a few years later as the Naval Aviation Station. I think technology and the technology that war, like the Civil War spurred, really was the death knell to the future of the reservation program and the idea of a tree plantation.
That was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Let's give a round of applause. That was fascinating. We do love the live oaks. And,
Everybody give.
oh yes, Casimer brought
Yes.
turtle decals for our cars, so you get a treat for company. And these are some cookies
get another garden.
No, it doesn't. And maybe after everybody gets, we have a calendar function, I see what's happening.
Yeah, that's where we advertise the program.
Super.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what we felt bad about, thankfully, Dave and I went through the Naval when they used to have this plaques next to each tree and showing like what part of the ship,
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then I brought my grandson back to see it, and there was nothing there, and she said Ivan took the trees all out.
Yeah,
Did they save the signs and things, or?
I'm not sure, boy, I've never seen those signs or any like photographs
Did
of the signs.
anybody else ever go through there and see all that? When you went through the park,
Yeah.
like if the tree was here and it had like they showed like this was the part of the ship that this tree was harvested for
Right.
and everything.
When I came here in 2016, I remember the first time I walked and hiked the Naval Live Oaks area, I paused and I looked around me and I thought to myself, this is called the Naval Live Oaks area. Where are the Live Oaks?
Yeah. They were there before Ivan.
And yeah.
Ivan, the storm surge came right through that part there and just took all those trees down.
What I think to be the largest, the most mature and the prettiest live oak trees there are on the south side of 98 along what's called the fishing trail. So if you parked at the park headquarters and then follow the Brackenridge Trail, that you can then continue off that boardwalk following the fishing trail, and that'll take you to 3 or 4 large mature live oaks with Spanish moss hanging off of them. Most everything north you'll find some younger live oak trees, but then just lots of stands of pine.
Yeah.
Have you driven through Gulf Breeze proper very much?
Let's see, I just visited the police station for the first time.
Well-
Not for anything bad.
Well, the thing is, like just right across the street from us, there's a huge live oak tree. It is huge and it's gorgeous. The people that live there probably don't get to see it as much as we do because we're looking across the street. But the thing with the Gulf Breeze proper, like, Fairpoint and, Shoreline it's like a bowl because our neighbors were telling us they never evacuated during Ivan because the wind kind of goes over the top. And so there's a lot of huge live oaks in Gulf Breeze proper.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's estimated that a live oak tree can reduce wind speeds by about 15 miles an hour.
Wow.
So if there's an argument to be had about maintaining the live oaks here or planting more, it's to help provide ground coverage and mitigate the wind, protect our
Now we should get a
structures.
discount on our homeowners insurance.
For having a live oak.
We have like 9 huge trees, well 2 of them are magnolias, but the rest are live oaks in our yard. When you Google our house, you can't see it because it's all trees.
All trees,
All
yeah.
trees, yeah. Trees.
On the Benson House property, those are the dozen
yeah.
live oaks. Those are
Oh, yeah,
all
there's
12 are live
several.
oaks, right?
I don't
Have you been to the house on Live Oak Street?
Yeah.
You'll have to
No.
go check those out.
Okay.
One is a twin. It splits at the bottom, so I don't
Okay.
know if it's 12 or 13 trees.
Okay.
But on that whole property, on that
Yeah.
corner of Live Oak, and, well, it's called something else now. But anyway, you should take a look at those reviews. I
The
took some
live oaks
pictures.
can live a few hundred years. I think the oldest live oak in Florida is over 400 years old.
Central Florida has a lot of they're the ones that are called the champion.
Okay.
I Googled that because they're huge and, but they're more inland. The ones on the shorelines kind of get beaten by the hurricanes.
Right. Yeah.
But thank you so much. That was fascinating.
You have one?
Yeah, where's that tree at? It's 400 years old.
I think it's near St. Augustine.
What about
Its nickname is the Old Senator.
the oaks? Yeah, that's right, the oaks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's
We
about
talked
450
about that
years old.
before.
But I don't think it's the oldest live oak in the United States. I think Mississippi might have claim to the oldest live oak tree. It's in a community just west of Gulfport.
Huh.
We're gonna hope to have one,
a part of that.
I think it'd be great to
Yeah.
have a park ranger to
Yeah.
be in the, mix of it all.
Yeah.
St. Augustine.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Should we
Thank
find
you.
some other thing? Come back and see us.
Will do.
Thanks for the
Um,
turtles.
Yeah.
Yes.
If anybody,
They're smart.
we give out those magnets every sea turtle nesting season. Whenever we find the first sea turtle nest in the park, that's when the magnets come out. We're already in shorebird nesting season, so once we find those shorebird nests, we'll start giving out shorebird magnets.
Oh,
Okay,
that's
good
neat.
deal.